when there's something that you have to bring up to your intimate partner that has been bothering you, of course, take the soft approach. Of course, try to be the vulnerable problem solver. Of course, try to understand and have empathy for their perspective.
If I had just gone directly, called Alan up at that moment and saying, I'm not showing up here, this is not something that I would ever catch myself dead in, blah, 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 that would be a hard approach. That would be really catastrophic for our relationship. Conscious couples, business partners, and singles committed to attracting their dream partner. Welcome to the Conscious Couples podcast, where we share our life, love story, and combined relationship expertise to help you create and consistently cultivate the most magnificent, intimate relationship possible.
Never again will you feel hopeless and alone in your intimate relationship challenges.
Having accumulated thousands of hours coaching conscious couples and individuals all over the world, as well as starting and growing a global business together, Alan and I are here to guide you in all things relationships.
Thank you again for tuning into the one place where it's not about you or me, it's about the we. Welcome back, everyone, to the Conscious Couples podcast, the one place where it's not about you and it's not about me, it is about the we. Today we're going to talk to you about, so last time we did love languages. Mm-hmm. Today we are going to talk about how to have a challenging conversation with your intimate partner. And the first thing to mention about this is courage. Mm-hmm. And Emilia has really helped me understand the importance of courage and how nothing really evolves or changes without at least a moment of courage. Because I think fear holds us all back most, especially maybe you're out there right now and you're thinking, you know, there's been something bothering me in my relationship lately that I'm afraid to bring up because I don't want to fight or I don't want to argue or I don't want to create a wedge in our relationship. Mm-hmm. But what's fascinating about this, and this is something you've taught me, is that not bringing it up is actually creating the wedge. A much bigger one. And so the idea here, and if you're on camera, you'll see me doing this, is we want you growing together with your intimate partner, not apart. Mm-hmm. And when you grow apart, what you need to do is have a courageous, vulnerable conversation that brings you back together. Mm-hmm. And for those of you only on audio, I just did a hand motion where two of my hands were going, like, sort of diverging, going away from each other. And then when you have a vulnerable, courageous conversation with love and respect, you can come together and it forms a heart with your hands.
Oh, that was cute. A big shout out to Next Level Podcast Solutions, who produced this show. Thank you to all of you on the back end so that everyone can hear and see us out there and contemplate their own relationships. And like Alan said, how do you have a challenging conversation with your partner? But more importantly, I think that what we wanted to focus in on this episode specifically was the approach. Specifically, the approach of having a challenging conversation. Because like you had mentioned, babe, the courage is absolutely everything. But having a courageous conversation, it starts with what is leading up to that? What is the approach and how are you going to angle yourself to prepare and have a conversation like that? And what are some of the fundamental things that you might want to consider when it comes to a courageous conversation, or a challenging conversation? And knowing when that's a good time too. Timing also is everything. So, babe, if you would tell the story of the backyard barbecue that we were at, and then we'll go into specifically how this story we chose because it became such a fundamental part of our story and one of the most challenging conversations that you and I have had, and the approach of which we'll try to get into some of those details at a high level, but we'd like to zoom into that experience for what that was like for us, because it was ultimately the conversations that you and I had to have that made our relationship grow so much closer and develop a far deeper level of intimacy and love and appreciation and respect. And so that's hopefully through our journey and us sharing that with each one of our listeners, we can give you the courage to start to approach and have a soft approach to some of those conversations with your partner.
Your relationship is a lot like a garden, and it can flourish as long as you are constantly pulling the weeds out. and you're identifying the pesky bugs that are trying to take your garden. And so something that needs to be discussed that is not being discussed is a lot like allowing bugs to multiply in your garden. And then you wonder why you don't have any fruit or fulfillment at the end of the season. So there was a backyard barbecue that I invited Emilia to. It was someone's birthday party, and it was in an area, it was in my hometown, and it was a less than ideal area of my hometown. And there were so on this podcast and in her podcast Evolve Ventures and my podcast Next Level University, we talk about this all the time. As a matter of fact, if you were to go back and listen to, I think it was episode 2 about alignment, or episode 1, I forget which, but we talk about core aspirations, core values, and core beliefs in conflict. And the persons, places, things, and ideas that you surround yourself with will dictate the quality of your life ultimately, and the quality of your relationship. And so I grew up in a certain environment. Emilia grew up in a certain environment. And so what was normal to me was not necessarily normal to her. What was acceptable to me was not necessarily acceptable to her. So we went to this backyard barbecue, and this, in hindsight, is very clear to me. This is persons, places, things, and ideas that I would never, ever associate with again. But that's because you helped me raise my standard. You helped me raise my awareness of the fact that this is not an environment that you would typically find yourself in. And so if you're out there watching or listening, maybe your intimate partner has invited you to something that was unsavory. Maybe they've invited you to something that was outside of alignment. Maybe they brought you, tailgating at a football game with beers and all that kind of thing. And maybe you are pretending to like football and you're pretending to have fun, but in reality, this is not aligned for you. Emilia showed up to this birthday party, backyard barbecue, and immediately was like, oh, this can't be the place. And after we spent that time and we invested in that barbecue, we made everyone feel loved, and we brought food and all that kind of thing. We didn't want to be disrespectful, but afterwards we did an experience review. We always do experience reviews. On our team, we started calling these performance reviews, but in our relationship, we call them experience reviews. So what was your experience? How was that? What was that from 0 to 10? Did you enjoy yourself? Was that fulfilling? Was that aligned? That kind of thing. And Emilia had to have a conversation with me about how she doesn't want to put us in environments like that ever again. And one thing I'll say here is that for me, growing up in a small town, what we're referring to here was not abnormal for me, and that was all I knew. And so in hindsight, it's very clear, I mean, we need to have higher standards than that. And Benjamin Franklin says this, and I'm just going to be direct about this. Listen, he says, when you lay down with dogs, you end up with fleas. And all he's really saying is that who you spend time with is who you become, and you have to be very discerning with who you spend time with. And quite frankly, Emilia had higher standards for who she associates with and what environments she puts herself in. And she's had some bad experiences in the past in some what we would refer to as low vibe environments. And so she had to have a conversation with me about that and saying, like, that was outside of alignment for me. I don't want to do that. I don't want to go into quote unquote old world. I'd rather bring the people we love into our world. And ever since then, I've really stopped going into old world. That really was, in hindsight, outside of alignment. And it's so clear to me now, which is so interesting. But back then, I didn't.
You're so blind to it because that's
normal. I was so
normal.
blind to it because that was my normal,
Yeah. So for those of you having context, I think it's so critical to bring my perspective of that so that you can identify within your own experience what might be or feel like out of alignment. Like Alan had mentioned, whether it's tailgating and going with your partner to something like that, whether it be even going to like a coworker party that you never wanted to go to in the first place, neither did your spouse or your partner, and you guys are justifying why you should be there. There's a lot of this that happens in life where you guys get invited to something that you otherwise would never on your own accord say, I want to do this with these types of people. And I think a lot of it comes down to having the courage to say no to that kind of stuff, even if it's someone that you love, might be the person inviting you, might be the person that is at the event or multiple people at the event. And this is something that I've certainly struggled with a lot over my life and been challenged with. But I remember when I got this invite, of course, I want to spend time with my baby, of course. But when I started to drive by where it was, there was a feeling inside of me that was like, literally, and I remember saying this to myself, this can't be it. And I was so uncomfortable because the scenery, like all of the environment that it was supposed to be at, that my GPS found, like said, you have arrived. I quite literally drove by and drove around for an additional 10 minutes and made a couple stops and was justifying to myself of like, how do I go into this environment knowing full well that I'm fully uncomfortable? The butterflies in my stomach, it was just a yucky feeling that I had. And I had to listen to that. And though I still put myself in that environment and we had a great time, we made people feel loved, like you had said, it was really uncomfortable in those moments because I kept getting pings by my intuition saying, this is not the environment that you would ever put yourself in. Why? Because Alan had mentioned, and many times I've been in environments that I felt unsafe. I've noticed other people being hurt in front of me, other people being made fun of, just that discomfort that comes in. And so while I tolerated that for that experience, I told myself this will never happen again. And it was really scary to me because that me bringing what was in alignment for me, I didn't want to feel better than anyone.
What's up, everyone? I'm Sarah Pringle, and I want to share my experience with my relationships coaching with Alan and Emilia. So first of all, it far exceeded expectations. I was definitely nervous going into it, but they carry such an I got you energy, and we went the direction that I needed to go and dug through the layers that I needed to connect back to the relationships I currently have in my life. The most empowering part was them helping me realize that I have the power to attract any relationship into my life that I want, and that I have the ability to create the most beautiful relationship with myself and understand others at such a deeper level. They're this beautiful balance of yin and yang and masculine, feminine, and I'm so beyond grateful for all the magic that they're creating and putting out there, and all the beautiful, fulfilled, conscious couples that they're helping all over the world.
Because I had my own standards, and I certainly didn't want to ever push my standards on top of you or on top of anyone else. And I think that that's when partnerships really struggle, because I love you, I should love this experience too, right? And that's what I think the story that we tell ourselves oftentimes, rather than having the courage and say, well, if this makes you feel uncomfortable, dig a little bit deeper and have that courageous conversation and provide that psychological safety between you and your partner to say, let's have this conversation. And so what we took was what I would refer to a soft approach versus a very hard, direct approach. For example, if I had just gone directly, called Alan up at that moment and saying, I'm not showing up here, this is not something that I would ever catch myself dead in, blah, 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 that would be a hard approach. That would be really catastrophic for our relationship, because I wouldn't go into that vulnerable expression of my fears, of my challenges, and bring us together. We had that soft approach where afterwards we did that experience review. And in that moment, because we had that opportunity from a communication standpoint to approach, why was this out of alignment with you? And you were able to just sit there and listen and regulate your own emotions, because that's kind of scary of like, well, what does this mean about our relationship?
What does this mean about me?
What does this mean about me?
And I had guilt and shame of like, I brought you into an unsafe environment unintentionally. Mm-hmm. And also the identity piece of like, how low are my standards? And so it's so challenging to have that approach, because you don't want to come off as I'm better than you. Never. But what you do want to know, communicate, is that this is outside of alignment for me.
Right.
And it's hard to communicate what's outside of alignment for you without making it seem like you think you're better, but that's not what it's about.
Right.
What it's about is, listen, I've been in environments like this in the past. They didn't serve me.
Right.
And they're not serving, they hurt me.
Yeah.
They're not serving you either. And this is why we say at the We that the whole can be greater than the sum of its parts. Mm-hmm. You've raised my awareness and my standards, and now I would never go back to a barbecue like that. And I honestly never will. Why? Because I'm now more aware of the downside, thanks to you.
Right.
Thanks to the fact that we create that safe space for the experience review, thanks to the soft approach and not you guilting and shaming me for inviting you.
Would never.
Right, and I know. And
a lot of people do that.
A lot of people do that of like, who do you think you are? That kind of stuff. this lack and attack, scarcity, fear-based emotional reactions, they hurt your relationship so much versus vulnerable, emotionally regulated, rational conversations about values, aspirations, and standards. That's what this podcast is about.
Yeah.
The most important things in a relationship is alignment, it's communication, and it's trust. And if you communicate in an attacky way, you're going to hurt trust. You're not going to be able to realign, and your communication is just going to get worse and worse. And so one thing I just want to add on this episode is one of the questions that I often ask you is, what about me, my character, or our intimate relationship has been bothering you lately that you wish didn't bother you, but it still sort of does? That's the permission question. And so this is how you can approach a difficult conversation. You can also, when there's something that you have to bring up to your intimate partner that has been bothering you, of course, take the soft approach. Of course, try to be the vulnerable problem solver. Of course, try to understand and have empathy for their perspective. Ask questions, that kind of thing. But how can you also be proactive to make sure that you're asking in advance, is there anything, by the way, that has been bothering you that you wish didn't, that still sort of does, that we can talk about in advance?
Right.
And so I think that, I know we have to go here, but what advice would you give to our listeners or viewers that will help them? Maybe there's something, they're out there right now and they're like, this has been bothering me for quite some time and I never had the courage to talk about it. I want to talk about it. I know it's going to make our relationship better. How do they approach that?
3 steps, and I have that down here. So if you see me looking down on the video, that's what it's all about. But I want to make sure that it's very simple. So number 1 is go vulnerable. Share your fear with your partner. When you can share your fear, it helps to start to get that courageous conversation going. But what's going to happen is that your partner might go into insecurity. And so if you're on the receiver, regulate your emotions. The person who is approaching this conversation, step number 2 is expressing yourself and the experience that you're having. Not so that your partner can invalidate or validate your emotions, but that you can express what's on your chest, what's been underneath the rug, completely vulnerably. And then as your receiver, be curious. Active listening helps so much. Step number 3 for the person who wants to approach that conversation is share your intention. My intention is to come together with me sharing this. I didn't feel comfortable sharing this because of XYZ. You don't even need to give a justification. If your partner understands and appreciates, respects, and values you, you bringing up this courageous conversation when you felt ready is a great indicator of where your relationship is at. And so if you can share your intention that you hope and you aspire to have this challenging conversations to bring you two closer, that can immediately help eradicate some of the fears and insecurities and shame, blame, guilt, whatever that your partner might be experiencing. And so if you're on the receiver end of that, like Alan said, go into vulnerable problem solvers so that you two can work together as a team rather than make this courageous conversation be something that tears you apart. What about you, Ben?
The last thing I'll say here is all the gold is buried where you don't want to dig, where you're afraid to dig. The fulfillment and the intimacy that you want is on the other side of getting back on the same wavelength, on the same page, and realigning. You cannot realign unless you identify the problem, communicate it, and then solve it as a team. And you can't do that without courage.
Truth.
All right, so we got to go because I have a coaching call in 2 minutes ago. I'm just joking. I have a coaching call in 2 minutes. So we have relationship talks. We have many clients that we coach all over the world. And if you want to jump on the phone, the first one's completely free. Every week we do a half-an-hour relationship talks with an individual or a couple, and we help them realign and achieve their dreams together. It's absolutely magnificent. Reach out. There's going to be a link in the show notes for Calendly, and you can book. I actually looked at next month. We have openings, I think 3 openings next month. So please click the link, and we hope to meet you soon.
Yeah, that would be awesome. We absolutely love those. The only other thing that we want to make sure that we share with our listeners is that we have a Relationship Talks live virtual event that we host every second Thursday of the month. This one in particular is going to be April 14th, and we are going to dive deep into your partner's love languages. So if this is something you've listened to our last episode, episode number 5, and you want to dig deeper into that and truly figure out what your partners are, please join this event. It will be really awesome. We'll have a ton of conscious couples there, and hopefully some that are there that have gone through some of this work that we've done with them that can share their experience to really show you what can be made from this. It's going to be wonderful, and we really do hope to see you there.
And if you're a listener of this show, join us in WhatsApp. We have a conscious couples community. I'll also put a link in the show notes as well for that. Join us on WhatsApp, ask us questions in there. It's a super engaged community. I think we have over 55 individuals.
Yep.
And even if you're single, it's your relationship with yourself and attracting your dream partner as well. Okay, we got to jump. Thank you so much. It's not about you.
Not about me.
It's about
the we.
The we. Talk to you soon.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Conscious Couples podcast. We love connecting with the Conscious Couples community, so please make sure you follow us on Instagram. I am at Evolve with Emilia, and Alan is a Lazaros 88.
Also, if you or your partner resonated with this episode, leave us a review at the link in the show notes, and please share this with someone you love and care about.
Until next time, remember, it's not about you or me. It's about
the we.